Welcome, Pewter Report readers, viewers, and listeners to a brand new edition of the Pewter Report podcast, Energized by Celsius. It is a Monday edition of the show. Hope everybody had a great weekend, and thank you so much for joining us as we start a new week and get a day closer to the NFL draft, which we're all very excited to be covering live in Tampa, Florida, when the Bucs make all of their picks. But today, we're going to talk a little bit more about the defensive side of the ball. The big news last week was, of course, that Lavonte David, their captain, their star player, a legend in the Tampa Bay community, re-signed with the Buccaneers. So a lot of the core pieces coming back for one more season. Does that mean that the defense can improve this year? Will it be the same as last season? Can they prevent a drop-off from happening? We're going to talk about all of that, plus a lot more on today's show. I'm your host, Matt Matera. Joined with me is my co-host and the face that runs the place at pewterreport.com, Scott Reynolds. And also joining us, our colleague from pewterreport.com. He woke up feeling dangerous, knowing he was coming on the podcast today, Josh Capo. Josh, welcome back to the show. And Scott, hello as well. How you guys doing?
Doing great.
Doing very well. Thank you, Matty. I always enjoy your intros. I never know where you're going to go with them, but they're always a great place.
Well, the backwards hat kind of set it up for me today because as we were just talking about before the show, Josh, you were wearing your hat backwards today in homage of one of the newest Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah, this is my first podcast since the Bucs signed Baker, so I wanted to make sure that, I paid, as you said, homage to him and his backwards caps.
You want to just give us real quick? I know we're going to talk a lot about defense today, but your overall thoughts on the signing of Baker Mayfield. I know we had a lot of discussions about Baker against Jacoby Brissett, but want to give you the floor since Baker is now a Buccaneer, and you can say how exciting he's going to be and not boring.
Yeah, I think from a coverage standpoint, it's phenomenal. I think all of us in the media are excited to cover Baker because he's nothing if not exciting. That's for sure. There's always a quote or something to go with him, and he certainly brings a lot of personality. From a football perspective, I think it was a low risk, high potential reward signing for the Bucs, and I think Dave Canales' offense caters to all the best attributes of Baker. You look at his kind of high water mark season, which would have been 2020. That was in an offense. That was when he was fully healthy, and he was in an offense very similar to what Dave Canales is going to institute. So for $4.5 million, which is in these days a pittance in the NFL for a quarterback, there's a ton of potential upside. And the downside is you end up seeing what you have when Kyle Trask by the end of the season. So, which the Bucs were fully ready to do before signing Baker. So, very little downside, lots of upside.
Yeah, totally agree.
I don't really have much more to add. I think it's going to be an open competition. It's low risk, high reward. I think, we talked about this last week on the show, and I'll just kind of sum it up real quick. Adam Slavon made a great point where he's like, Andy Dalton got like $5 million and Taylor Heineke got about $10 million or whatever it was. Are you really telling me like Andy Dalton is that much better than Baker Mayfield? No, not really. At least right. I don't know what you guys think, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. So Bucs got a really good bargain for what.
As long as he's not talking about Aaron Rodgers, Adam has amazing points. Right?
That's true. Well, the other thing too is Baker Mayfield is the only quarterback in the NFC South with a playoff win. I mean, Taylor Heineke is I think it was 0-1 in the postseason. Andy Dalton's 0-4. So at least Baker's got that going for him, in addition to the Buccaneers having his lower salary,
absolutely
on the table for them. So that's good. We're going to talk a little bit of defense today, though. That's near and dear to my heart, as many of you know.
You're a defensive guy?
I am. Surprise. I know.
What?
It's a bit of a shocker, but yeah.
You've kept that as a well-hidden secret for years now, right?
I know. And I begged to be an offensive coordinator for the South Pasco Predators, and they said, nope, only spot we got is DC and defensive line coach. So I said, all right, fine, whatever.
Yeah, the way you criticized Byron Leftwich, people would have thought you're offensive.
I know. Just want that offense to get better. That's all it was, So, no, but and the funny thing is we did have some comments on Twitter about the title of today's show. And I'll throw this up there again. Can the Bucs defense prevent a drop off? From last year, and what we mean by that, and while it bears a little bit of explaining, is because I saw some comments on Twitter saying, "Oh, the Bucs defense wasn't that good last year." Well, it was the better side of the ball for sure. And the reason why we say, can this defense prevent a drop off from last year? And of course, it can get better. There's room for improvement. Don't sit there and think that this is a top 5 defense by any stretch, but it was the better side of the ball last year. And back in the day, back when I started covering the Buccaneers in the 1990s, Warren Sapp was famous for saying, give us 17 points, we win the game, right? That's all he wanted out of that Trent Dilfer offense that under Tony Dungy was just 17 points. In other words, the Bucs defense could hold teams under 17. And if they had 17 on offense, they could win the game. Well, I think what you guys would agree, in the modern day NFL, that standard's kind of raised up a little bit. Scoring is up from 2-3 decades ago. And as a result, I think 21 points is a fair threshold. And if you look at Tampa Bay last year, and we've said it before, it bears repeating, in 10 of their 17 games, the Bucs defense held their opponents to 21 points or less. That's winning football in today's age of football. And they were 7-3 in those games. So, and you look at one of those games was the Packers game. They lost 14-12, just because the offense was so inept and Mike Evans was out of the game, right? So in that game, they held a team to 14 points, and that was one of those 3 losses. But guys, they only won 8 games last year, and the defense was largely responsible for at least 7 of them because they were 7-3 in those games when they held opponents to 21 points or less.
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of conflation with the Bucs defense in terms of they didn't go up against a lot of great offenses, and so maybe they got a little overhyped from that perspective. But when I was looking at, for better or for worse, these are their PFF grades against different offenses that they faced. The Green Bay Packers, which finished 15th in points scored, the Cincinnati Bengals, which is one of the better offenses in the league, and the Dallas Cowboys, which was one of the better offenses in the league. Those were 3 of their top 6 PFF grades. Yes, they struggled against the Chiefs. Yes, they struggled. Some would say they struggled against the Seahawks. They kind of did in the second half there. Yeah. And then the Ravens game, again, first half great, second half terrible. Those were some of their lower scores. So when everything balances out, maybe the balance of their schedule wasn't against the greatest offenses in the world, especially because they were going up against the NFC South, which featured some not so fantastic offenses. Yeah. I still think that they were take everything out, strip it all of context. I still think they were a top 10 defense. And to your point, Scott, they absolutely were a reason why the team made it to the playoffs. It certainly was not that offense.
Yeah.
So that's for sure.
Yeah, I would say this, and Matt, I want to get your reaction on this, right? So Tampa Bay allowed 21.6 points per game last year. And as Monty Kiffin once told me, and this is not just a Kiffinism, this is any defensive coordinator, yards are one thing. Don't care about yards. It's points. Points win games, not yards. Tampa Bay ranked 15th, which is just about middle of the pack in points per game, 21.6, right? And there were a couple teams with Tennessee 21.1, Denver 21.1, Jacksonville 21.4, Tampa Bay 21.6. So there's a lot of teams in that 21 points per game kind of threshold there. So Tampa Bay gave up 21.6 points per game, did not have the benefit of playing ahead in almost all of their games because the offense had dropped from 30 points per game down to 18 points per game. So having said that, 21.6 points per game by this Todd Bowles defense, which suffered some big time injuries, Shaq Barrett being the biggest, that's off just a bit from 2021 when this team went 13-4. They allowed 20.9 points per game. So it's a less than 1 point per game differential. The offense drops from 30 points per game to 18 points per game. The defense drops from essentially 20.9 points per game to 21.6 points per game. Hardly any noticeable drop off there. Now, there were some other things, third down conversions, interceptions plummeted, right? Sacks, were a little skewed because they didn't have that big time pass rusher this year. Vita was your leading sacker, 6.5 from your nose tackle, and played the 3 tech quite a bit and attacking the B gap. But Matt, it wasn't a big drop off in the defense. So that's kind of why we're justified in saying this defense probably is going to do okay this year if there isn't a drop off.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I think the point that you can make is statistically, the Bucs didn't really drop off that much. Not in every category. Obviously, like turnovers was a huge hit. But I think what really hurt the Bucs more than anything else is one, just the offense with the constant, up and down play and going 3 and outs often. So the defense had to be on the field more and keep them in games because the Bucs weren't scoring. But the Bucs defense just didn't really pass the eye test. And, you go back to what Lavonte David said yesterday when he spoke to the media, and he said a big thing was turnovers, number one. And I think we all agree with that because of that drop off. And he said third downs as well. And, I was kind of thinking, getting the third down stops, that's where, sacks come into play. And, obviously with that's in sacks, you're thinking, all right, well, maybe they didn't really get a ton. But the Bucs still had 45 sacks on the season. That was tied for 7th in the NFL. So if you're saying that this team, as far as the pass rush goes, they're top 10 in the league, all right, that's pretty good. I think a lot of fan bases would really sign up for that. But then when you realize Shaq Barrett underperformed, JTS, very polarized figure in terms of is he on the right track or is he becoming a first-round bust? We can save that conversation for another day. So I think optically, the Bucs defense didn't really pan out. I think some of the glaring third down conversions or third down stops, it actually isn't as bad again compared to the rest of the league. But then you go back and you watch and you think about that Steelers game where they converted multiple 3rd and 10 plus, 3rd and 12, and it's like this defense is too good to be allowing those type of stops. So I really think we held them to a very high standard. Understandably so. I think another example is, the run game. There were so many times when stopping the run, they got absolutely, gashed up the middle and to the outside as well. It's just like, we've never seen this with the Todd Bowles defense before. Yeah. And still at the end of the day, 7-3 when allowing 21 points or less. So this team was able to stay afloat, I think, for the most part. And that's why it's like, can they keep the house together for another season? Does it completely break apart, or are they a much stronger foundation because they know where to pick it up next year?
Yeah, and Josh, let me just get your thoughts on that too, right? I mean, talked about drop-offs. We talked about the offense, 30 points per game down to 18. That's a kind of a catastrophic drop-off right there. And points, again, more important than yards. But Tampa Bay allowed 121.1 yards the first couple of years under Todd Bowles. This Bucs defense was just, the best, if not one of the best in terms of run defense, right? And they made a little bit of sacrifices to be a little bit more shut down oriented in terms of the passing game, right? Not so lopsided, because you had a couple teams, Rams come to mind, that just would forego the run because they could pass the ball in the Buccaneers. But Josh, the Buccaneers in 2021 during that 13-4 run, they only allowed 91.6 yards per game on the ground, and that ranked 3rd in the league. And then last year, I mean, they allowed 30 more yards per game on the ground, and that's 121 yards per game, and they fell from 3rd to 15th. And I know that's something that we talk about, sacks, and even though sacks are kind of a skewed statistic, right? Because it's one play, right? I mean, when you have 45 sacks in a season, that means, okay, you had 45 really good plays. But out of the hundreds and hundreds of plays that you have per year. But that's really one thing where you look at the Ravens game, that got away from them in the second half. The Panthers game, it was a 7-0 Carolina lead at halftime. That game got away from them in the second half. That was an area that Tampa Bay really did notice a drop-off.
Right. And Scott, I tend to look at, a little bit beyond the surface level, just yards per game, but it's backed up in terms of more analytical statistics as well. For the first few years of Todd Bowles' tenure with the Bucs, they were consistently top 10 in EPA per play. In terms of their defense against the run game. Last year, that fell very similarly with the yardage numbers that you gave out there. They were 14th against the run. And I think that we saw schematically there were some changes to the defense where at the beginning of the season, it looked like there was a conscious decision that we're going to give up a little bit more on the run game because we want to be a little bit more stout in the pass game. But even that didn't come to bear. And I think a lot of it came down to that second half those falterings weren't just against the run game, they were against the pass game. And I think it was just kind of being left hung out to dry by the offense. Their offense against the pass, they were 17th in EPA per play. So they didn't get that extra juice on the pass side that they thought they would. I don't think it was for lack of talent or scheme. I think a lot of it came down to just the defense was gassed at the end of the game. Some of it may be a little schematic. We've had some private chats where we talk about slot receivers running, seam routes, and the Bucs defense struggled to pick those up.
A hard time against them. Right?
Yeah. But in general, the defense was good enough to be a playoff team and carried them there. But they have not replaced a lot of the bodies that they've been losing this offseason. There are still quite a few question marks if you were to try and pencil in their starting lineup right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of those too, we praise Jason Light for all of the hits he made in free agency and the draft and trades like Rob Gronkowski, which was kind of a no-brainer, but the Jason Pierre-Paul one comes to mind in terms of helping the Bucs win the Super Bowl. But Akeem Hicks did not have the season at all that they were hoping that
not for the price.
Not for the price. And also too, with Ndamukong Suh, even though he was clearly losing a step, if he has a strength, it is his availability. Never missed a single game in Tampa, and never missed a game due to injury in his career. Only missed a game due to suspension. But Hicks missed some games. Surprise, surprise. He's aging, and that was kind of his MO at the end of his Bears career. And that was his only sack of the season, week 18. And he lined up as an edge rusher to get that sack too. So he didn't even really provide that 1-2 punch inside as a pass rusher that they were hoping, right? Because you look at Will Golston, who remains unsigned, and I believe if the numbers can come into both camps' favor, I think Golston comes back on a cheaper 1-year deal to provide some depth. But he had 4.5 sacks, a career high in 2021, 0 sacks last year. And Ndamukong Suh had 6 sacks in 2021. And so you look at his replacement, Akeem Hicks, and he had 1. So the pressure, the sacks, the pass rush was not there really from their defensive line. And it wasn't there from the outside linebackers either. This was really a manufactured unit where you had a lot of backups like Anthony Nelson getting sacks.
Yeah.
You had, Antoine Winfield getting to the quarterback. That's going to happen because they like to blitz their slot guys. Lavonte David had to step up in the sack department, and he did with 3 sacks. I think he only had 1.5 the year before, or something to that nature. So,
Matt, can you go back a picture real quick? I think I figured out why Hicks didn't deliver that 1-2 punch they were looking for. And I'm pretty sure it's just because he was too busy giving headlocks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Watching a little bit too much wrestling. Yeah, but I mean, we talked a lot about how the Bucs want to get quicker on the defensive line, and Suh might be losing a step. Well, clearly it didn't make that much of a difference.
Right.
Akeem Hicks only got 1 sack. Like, I don't really care how much Ndamukong Suh lost it a little bit, and that's why I'm pretty concerned about the Bucs defensive line. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I don't have a ton of faith in Logan Hall right now. Like, we'll see. And listen, not every player has to be like J.J. Watt posting their workouts on Instagram and stuff, but I haven't really heard or seen much about Logan Hall. I don't know what he's looking like going to next season, but I think his rookie year was, I don't want to say disappointing, but it certainly wasn't. Okay, fine. It was disappointing. It certainly wasn't anything where you feel encouraged about the next season. Oh, are you going to talk about him? Is that where you were going with this?
No, actually I wasn't, but I was going to say what's never disappointing is the fact that on Mondays we have this little thing called
Roll Call. Tell us where you're at, Pewter people. We have awesome fans all over the globe that watch the Pewter Report podcast. So we like to have fun with everybody on every show, but specifically on Monday, one of us will go on a little rant or a diatribe about something related. And while we go into that, we want everybody to put in the comments, everybody watching right now, put where you are watching from, and we will make sure we put it on the screen. And before the show, Sky, you said you had something that you want to talk about during Roll Call. So why don't we get into it? And we'll start with Tom from Gainesville, Florida, as we start Roll Call.
Really interesting, right? Because the topic of today's show is can the Bucs prevent a drop-off from their defense? And it's interesting because we want to see this defense play better. We want to see one of those edge rushers, and maybe it's Shaq Barrett, hopefully coming back, fingers crossed for him, getting back to that double-digit sack production. And in other words, a guy that can really threaten the quarterback and really make things difficult for an offensive coordinator, right? And make them change their game plan a little bit to just focus on stopping Joe Tryon-Shoyinka or Shaq Barrett or whatever. Like that's where the Buccaneers, and especially when they have two guys humming like they had with JPP and Shaq, that bookend tandem, that's really where things came to life for the Buccaneer defense in that Super Bowl run. So having said that, Tampa Bay enters free agency, and we're already well into free agency now, but they entered free agency with 22 unrestricted free agents. Tom Brady was 23, but he's retired. Most of those were on the defensive side of the ball. Now, they've only lost a couple of players in free agency, but a couple of those were some depth guys, Sean Murphy-Bunting and Raheem Nunez-Roches, and then also Mike Edwards. So there are three guys that they've lost in free agency, all on the defensive side. Edwards was a part-time starter. And so when you look into this draft, it's interesting because they still have some bodies that they need to re-sign. I think Will Golston might be one of those. Hopefully Logan Ryan will be one, because right now they only have two safeties on this team. That's right, folks. I'm not kidding. Antoine Winfield Jr. is one of them. And the other guy is Nolan Turner. You remember him from the preseason. Nolan Turner, undrafted free agent from Clemson. So for those people that don't want Brian Branch drafted or think that safety is a wasted pick early, no, it's not, because they only have two of them on the roster. Okay, so it's interesting. Tampa Bay still has some work it needs to do on defense to prevent a drop-off on the defensive side, but also hopefully make Todd Bowles' unit better on that side of the football. At the same time, though, where was the weakness, guys? It was on the offensive side of the ball. Yeah. This team needs some speed. This team only scored 18 points per game. This team doesn't have Tom Brady anymore. So where do you spend not just your draft capital, because you have 9 picks and maybe the Bucs trade up. We know Jason likes to trade up a little bit in some of these rounds and grab some players. But when you have 9 picks and you only have 3 of them within the first 2 days, but they don't have a 4th rounder either. So you've got 1 first rounder, a 2nd rounder, and a 3rd rounder as of right now. I'd like to see the Bucs maybe trade down and pick up an extra 3rd rounder or maybe even a 2nd rounder. But where do you distribute that draft capital, especially those premium picks? Do you spend it on an offense that you've kind of weakened, especially along the offensive line, with trading away Shaq Mason and cutting Donovan Smith and having to really improve that side of the ball from a points perspective because you got a rookie play caller and a new quarterback and an unproven quarterback in Kyle Trask? Or do you want to maintain this defense and hope that it gets better? Because if Todd Bowles' defense does take a step back last year due to attrition, and this offense doesn't really rise to the occasion, folks, there's no chance the Bucs make the playoffs this year.
Josh, go ahead with your thoughts first.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And I think what they ultimately have to do is balance those two things. I don't think they make the choice. I don't think they say, we're going to focus on defense on the draft, or they're going to focus on offense. Scott, you and I have had some extensive conversations where we do really think it's going to kind of be a back and forth affair where they're going to use roughly half their picks on one side of the ball, roughly half their picks on the other side of the ball, and probably take a kicker in the 2nd round. You know,
you sick man.
So, but
wait, why are all these people leaving the chat? Why are these people stop viewing the podcast? What's happening here? We're just kidding, folks. They're going to take one in day 3. Okay, that's what Jason Light does. He drafts kickers.
That's
okay, the man's going to draft. This is his 3rd kicker this year.
Pro Bowl kicker.
That's right.
That
he did.
Kicker just did not make the Pro Bowl with the Bucs.
That's right. Yeah,
that's the issue.
Yeah.
So, but I think on the back end overall, you're missing, that starting safety next to Antoine Winfield. Yeah. We know that the Bucs are high on last year's 5th round pick Zion McCollum. They did a great job of bringing Jamel Dean back. They've got the 3/4 of that starting secondary kind of figured out. It's the front 7 that I think maybe you've got some worries about. Yeah. Now here's the interesting thing, and I think I'm going to use it to prove a little bit of a point that I tend to go back and forth with fans on, is despite the defensive line taking several steps backwards last year, right? Joe Tryon-Shoyinka didn't finish the plays that he should have finished. Shaq Barrett did go down, and the production behind him wasn't the most stellar. And then, of course, the interior defensive linemen, they didn't step up and get all the sacks that they should have. They still came out with about the same amount of sacks year over year. And that is because Todd Bowles is so great at generating sacks, right?
Yeah.
But the big issue that the front seven had was consistently generating pressure, which I think goes to prove the point that I typically try and say, which is it's the more predictable thing. It's the thing that on a play-to-play basis is much more necessary for the success of a defense, is creating more pressure. And I definitely think that they need to use one of those day 1, day 2 picks to address creating more consistent pressure up front. The nice thing about this year's draft class, when you look at some of the deeper positions, I think they line up very well with some of the Bucs' needs, right? It's a fairly deep at the top tackle class on the offensive side of the ball. It's a fairly deep secondary class for a couple of different things that the Bucs may have needed. With Jamel Dean's re-signing, I don't think there's that need for that outside corner, which this was a really deep corner class. But there are a lot of intriguing slot options between safeties and corners there. And it's a relatively deep class in terms of creating pressure with on the defensive line. Now, where that pressure comes from, we can debate. I think, Scott, you and I are both a little low on the interior pressure class or interior defensive line class. But on the edges, they could potentially really help bolster their outside linebacker room, because I think day 2, there's a litany of guys who are really intriguing, have some really great, and there's one right there. So I'm not going to
Uzama, and
thank you for doing his name, because I can never pronounce it correctly. So somebody like him, Will McDonald, those guys are all potentially available on day 2.
Yeah. One note about him, I mentioned this in SR's Fab 5, and Todd Bowles will be at the K-State Pro Day. So that's an interesting little caveat there. He, to my knowledge, has not been any pro days, but he's going to K-State's. There's Felix Anudike-Uzama, who did meet formally with the Buccaneers. Julius Brents, the cornerback. We also like Derek Hall from Auburn. He's a fantastic player, as is Isaiah McGuire, so from Missouri. So there's definitely some day 2 guys that could be there in the mix for the Buccaneers for sure.
I'll add KJ Henry as the only Clemson defender I actually liked out of a draft class where they put a lot of guys out there.
He actually had a lot of nice things to say about Nolan Turner from the year that they played together. But to get back to the original question, the right answer is that, they'll address both sides of the ball, and they'll go and win a Super Bowl this year, but that's not always how it works out. I just feel like if we're slanting this discussion to like which do they need to address / help out more, I still do think it is the offensive side of the ball. Not really for it. I mean, a big part of it, of course, is the holes missing on the offensive side of the ball. But at the end of the day, I still trust Todd Bowles to kind of get the job done, with regardless of if they're lacking on the interior defensive line, or they don't typically, or specifically, I should say, find that slot corner in this year's draft. Because I think, if they're not getting the pressure from whether it's the defensive line or edge rushers, maybe Devin White will turn into the blitzer that he was a couple seasons ago, where he had 9 sacks and probably would have got double digits if he didn't get COVID at the end of the year and had to miss a game or 2. He has all those exotic blitzes, so they'll still get in the face of the quarterbacks. And,
I think the biggest thing is it kind of goes back to that point about stopping the run. They got to do a better job getting into 3rd and long, because when you're in 3rd and 4, that's kind of no man's land for a defense. You still run a draw. It's so much harder to defend, or it's so much easier to defend 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8 than it is 3rd and 4, 3rd and 3. And the Buccaneers got themselves into too many of those 3rd and short situations last year because they didn't stop the run well enough on 1st and 2nd down. And that takes away some of those pressure packages you're talking about, Matt.
Yes, it absolutely does. And that kind of hurt the Bucs in the past too, where they would get to 3rd and longs, and then they play this soft zone and allow the 1st down, or play off the ball, which would really be frustrating. And the big stat that we keep bringing up is that the Bucs were 7-3 when they only allowed 21 points per game. That still means the Bucs offense has to score at least 22 or have a solid day, unless you get one of those rock fights, as I like to call it, with
Yeah.
like a 12-9, 12-6 type of game. So the Bucs can't really afford to do that this season. And another thing that kind of hurts is for the majority of the season, the Bucs offense did a pretty good job of holding on to the football. Sure, there were a couple of games where there were multiple turnovers.
That's Tom Brady.
The Bengals game. But, the fact that they weren't scoring points and they weren't turning over the ball is like a huge problem. So you gotta address that offensive line. You need to add another running back.
Speaking of
speed would be great
of addressing, Big Al is addressing the kicker position. He is campaigning for the Buccaneers to draft a kicker in the 6th round. He just says, don't do it in rounds 5 and above, but 6th round, get a kicker.
Big Al also wants to address our edge defender, the team's edge defender.
Yeah.
Hole in the 2nd round with Andre Carter.
No,
and I cannot sign on to that at all.
No.
Oh my goodness, Big Al! If you would have been at the Senior Bowl with us, you would be so far out on Carter, you'd be back in.
Yes, for sure. We have a couple of nice comments to get to here, but we would be remiss, Matt, if we didn't talk about the company that pays the bills here, and that is our favorites, energy drink. Celsius is the official energy drink of Pewter Report. Just look at those cans, folks. Holy smokes. Fantasy Vibe. Yeah, it tastes like Fantasy Vibe. If you know what Fantasy Vibe tastes like, well, it's mandarin orange and marshmallow.
That's a pretty awesome combination. And we know Bucs love creamsicle. It's like drinking an orange.
It is. And it's fantastic. And there's the orange too. I had one of those over the weekend. I had a Fuji apple pear this morning, which is fantastic. In the afternoons, I love the sparkling lemon and lime, which is one of their new flavors. And listen, flavors, this is where it comes down to, folks. If you want the energy drink, it's going to be the best flavor, tropical vibe, Arctic vibe, peach vibe, and the best energy without the sugar crash. It's Celsius. Easy. Game over. Draft pick number 1 right there. Okay. And the reason why I say that is because there's no sugar in Celsius. That means no sugar crash. You get all the energy, all the taste. Where can you find these delicious, energy-packed beverages? Well, you can find them at your local grocery stores, health and fitness stores, convenience stores, or what's the other term I'm thinking about, Matthew?
It is a bodega.
Bodega. That's right, bodega. Go to Celsius.com, click on the store locator, and punch in your address and find out where Celsius is sold near you. Once you find the flavors you like, order on Amazon and save money with the subscribe and save option.
Yeah, please do. Love Celsius. We got a couple of comments we'll get into. I just like this one from Dave Canales. SR, how can you recall so many detailed statistics from memory? It's amazing. Love what you guys do. Go Bucs.
This is the only thing I'm good at. That's it. This is it. The
only
thing I'm good at.
It is not just statistics. Scott can tell you the 4th round pick from 2007's draft. I mean, anything and everything Bucs historical. He is the almanac, which is absolutely fantastic, and one of the things that we enjoy so much about it.
I appreciate you sucking up like that, Josh. That's fantastic. But truth be told, as I get older, and for you middle-aged and older crowd out there, you might kind of catch my drift here. I'm at the age where I can remember. You're talking about the 2007 4th round pick. Like, I can remember a guy's where he went to school, what position he played. Right, I can remember his height and weight, but damn it, I can't remember his name. Like, it's like what I call like the non-bullseye memory. It's like where you hit everything but the bullseye. Like, what's the guy's name? Right, that's why I have to look stuff up, because I can remember things kind of sort of well, but I'm losing a little bit.
Well, this guy they drafted from Washington, JTS, has to improve drastically to justify his playing time. I think it's a huge year. I'm not ready to call it a make or break season for Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, but the clock is very much ticking on JTS.
Yeah.
There needs to be improvement. Whether he's on the right path right now, 8 sacks in 2 seasons, 2 seasons in a row. If he's going to be the guy, he can't have Anthony Nelson outplay him again. especially at the beginning of the season where we don't really know about Shaq Barrett. But Josh, you seem to
Anthony Nelson didn't outplay him. He just happened to have more sacks. You're talking about 4 plays over 17 games. That's it. That's the difference. On a play-to-play basis, JTS absolutely outplayed Anthony Nelson. Nelson just got a couple of sacks. And if you go back and look,
big sack fumbles.
He did have 2 big sack fumbles. Absolutely. He had 3. Where he had 2 of them I remember off the top of my head, and we know I'm not great with memory, but one of them he was completely unblocked. I guarantee you, if JTS had been given that same rep, he would have gotten the sack fumble as well.
Yeah.
Another one.
Sure, he wouldn't have just gotten close and almost brought him down.
That's a fair counter argument. The other one was, I believe, the tackle completely blew his set, and Nelson was able to blow right by him. Again, any guy playing at that level is going to make that play there. So JTS could have had about anywhere between 9 and 12 sacks if he would just finish those tackles. And I will 1000% admit he has got to do better at finishing. So, but on a play-to-play basis, make no mistake, JTS outplayed Anthony Nelson by a wide margin.
Yeah. Now, the thing with JTS is the effort's there. That's what I love. I love the kid. Like, he's fantastic. He's a try-hard guy. The effort's there. The motor is there. He's got everything you want except for finishing, right?
Yep.
And as Warren Sapp famously told me, and probably others in the media at the time, you don't make Pro Bowls from pressures. You make Pro Bowls from sacks. You don't get paid for pressures. You get paid for sacks.
You're absolutely right about that. And what I will say is, would you rather
that's where pressure? He's.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I'm sorry.
I was going to say that's where he's got to step up because when you get the pressure on third down, trust me, when PFF and these other people grade pressures, sometimes those pressures end up becoming completions, right? Like Dak Prescott was pressured mercilessly in the Dallas Cowboys season opener in 2021, and the Buccaneers won the game, and he was pressured. He only sacked once, but he was pressured the entire game. Still completed 70% of his passes, right? And so the sack is the exclamation point. It's the period at the end. It says, it's third down. We sacked you. You've got to get off the field now. That's where pressures can, sacks can be better. But at the same time, I remember Styles White led this team in sacks. Styles G. White led this team in sacks. I think he had 8.5 back in the Raheem Morris days. Maybe it was John Gruden. I think it was John Gruden at the end of his tenure here. But those 8.5 plays were so inconsequential throughout the game. So having said that, and trying to defend sacks, a sack is only one play. And guess what? If you get a sack on first down, that's right. That
is such a great. That should go. For
those listening to the audio version of the podcast, JTS is like playing Mortal Kombat and you messed up the finish him button combo, says G Vegas. Exactly right.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's if you get a sack on first or second down and they end up converting on the drive and getting their first down, then sack didn't matter.
Yep. Yeah, I'll kind of finish up my diatribe on that. And I think it was Shaggy who asked, or said something about pressures and horseshoes and hand grenades.
Yeah.
Pressures year over year are much more predictable. All right. It's a predictable way of evaluating how good of a pass rusher somebody is. Sacks are unpredictable. Okay. And the best example of that is Shaq Barrett. He had 19 sacks one year at an unsustainably high conversion rate.
Yeah.
Nobody expected him to do 19 sacks the next year. He was about the same pass rusher over the following 2 years, even though the sack numbers varied wildly. So pressures, it goes to predictability. Okay. Now, the other thing that I will say is when you look at the skill set of Anthony Nelson versus, say, JTS and the sack versus pressure conversation, what's easier to teach? How to finish or how to actually beat another NFL player
and get there, right?
Who's trying to block you.
Yeah.
It is much easier to teach somebody to finish than it is to beat an NFL offensive lineman. So with that, I do want to kind of bring the conversation back to a point that Matt made earlier. And I think just kind of building off of it, because I thought he had a really good point. The Bucs were set to lose potentially 3 very impactful players on their defense. And really, They absolutely brought back 2 of the 3. The third one, it's a big question mark. I think most of us are not counting on that impactful player to return. And that's really just Shaq Barrett not returning to pre-injury form. All right. But if you look at all these players that they're losing on the defense, most of those players, I think their performances can be replicated, if anything, in the aggregate, right? Okay. I think Keanu Neal and Logan Ryan played solidly as depth safety pieces. I don't think either one of them were, transcendent performances. And I think the Bucs, between free agency and the draft, can potentially replace that production and that performance. But the 2 that they were able to bring back was Lavonte David, who I think also helps elevate Devin White's play, right? Mm-hmm. Getting him back, especially at the price they were able to, that was fantastic. And bringing Jamel Dean back at such an impactful position. Dean's been a top 10, top 15 corner over the last couple of years on a snap-to-snap basis. Those were huge. You look at the rest of the players, a lot of it was depth, and a lot of it was complementary skill sets. And I think with re-signing of Anthony Nelson, you got a little bit of that complementary skill set brought back. And I'm not super worried because they haven't really lost a high-end player outside of Shaq Barrett. Yeah. Most likely not being the same Shaq Barrett, at least this first season back.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The thing that does kind of concern me with some of the guys you mentioned that they re-signed with, like Lavonte and Devin White, if they are going to, or I guess what I should say, if there is that uncertainty with the outside linebackers or with the interior defensive line, I really do think it's going to be Lavonte and Devin White that are kind of the straw that stirs the drink for the Bucs defense next season. Because like Lavonte was great last year. He had more tackles last season than he had since, I believe, 2015. Like just overall combined tackles. But I don't know how much can expect Lavonte to play a full 17-game season again. Yeah. And if you have to rely on Devin White, can Devin White finally shed a lot of the blocks and get better in stopping the run and continue to improve in his pass coverage? Like, can Devin White really be the guy? Can Lavonte and Devin White really be the dynamic duo that they were at one point? And now it's kind of like, I don't know. So a lot of it's, will Lavonte continue his consistent play? And can Devin turn into a superstar Devin White again? And then Jamel Dean, I'm not as concerned about him, but it reminds me a little bit of a conversation we had about a separate player that's no longer on the Buccaneers. And it's a little apples to oranges with this, but Leonard Fournette, when he got that big contract, we kind of discussed on the podcast, will that contract kind of stop Leonard Fournette from like wanting to go all in and go all out because, hey, I got my money. And that's kind of like what a lot of players do in their contract year. They ball out, then they get the contract, and some of them coast. And I don't think that's going to be the case with Jamel Dean, but I also thought, and I'm not saying that Leonard Fournette like slacked off really by any means, but clearly when he was playing in a contract season, he was way better than when he was under contract. And then it was Fat Lenny when he got into OTAs and all of that stuff, and he got into shape. And so I don't know, that's in the back of my head a little bit with Jamel Dean. I do trust Jamel Dean that, he's going to go all out. I think he likes the idea of the grave diggers with the Bucs secondary and him and Carlton back again. Mm-hmm. Just a couple of things that have ideas that I floated around with this defense.
I think with Dean, there's still the opportunity for him to have a bit of a chip on his shoulder, right? The first few years, it's been him and SMB, right? Who's going to be the starter. And he wasn't the starter till this past year. Then when he got the starter role, obviously he wants to ball out to get the contract. The contract came in, I think, a little bit lower than most would have thought, myself included, right? I think I did an article for Pewter Report where I projected him much higher than the AAV that he got. But I still think he has the opportunity because he certainly has the skill set. Over the last couple of years, I would even argue he's played better than Carlton Davis. But Carlton Davis is paid like the one, and Carlton Davis, I think, is still considered the one. And so I think for Jamel Dean, the opportunity there is to say, you know what, maybe Carlton Davis isn't the best corner on this team. It's really me. So I still think there's that opportunity for him to create. And we know players playing at this high of a level, Matt's going to have one on his favorite team in not too long. They love to build up these chips in their head, on their shoulders, in their head and their mindset in terms of people don't respect me, and create those arguments because it helps to drive them to the best version of their performances.
Yeah, and I think the thing too that we've talked about it, we'll kind of circle back around to it, that this defense has to get better at is taking the ball away.
Yes,
because you can't be a cornerback like Carlton Davis, and he's shown he can do it before. He had 4 interceptions during the 2020 season, and we know Carlton's going to be in position to break passes up, but damn it, takeaways are important. They stop the offense from scoring points and to give the ball back to your offense, and it gives you a chance to score, right? It's a huge momentum play. And you can't have the only interception of your season be off of a deflected pass that really wasn't even intended for your guy.
Yeah.
I mean, we appreciate that, Carlton, but there's got to be more than that, right? For Jamel Dean to have 2 interceptions in week 2 and then none the rest of the season, right? I mean, these are the 2
you
starting
picked off
quarterbacks.
Jameis Winston. Oh, so impressive. Big deal.
Right, and you did it twice. But I'm just saying, it's like you've got nearly you got $28 million invested in your 2 starting corners. They can't combine for 3 interceptions in a season. You've got to have more than that. Each one of them getting 3 would be acceptable. You don't have to lead the league and get 5 or 6, but right. I'm just saying, over the course of, they even gave you an extra game, folks. You got 17 games now. We're not talking 16 games. You got 17. Let's see some more interceptions, and not just from the 2 corners, but also too from the Pro Bowl center, Antoine Winfield. This was a player that had his interception in week 1. And if my memory serves, and I'll check the statistics here because I'm not always right, but I believe Winfield only had 1 interception, because you had Mike Edwards have 2, Dean had 2, Murphy Bunting had 2, and yes, Antoine Winfield Jr., who talked about getting more interceptions this season, had 1 interception. It was in week 1 and went over the rest of the way. And this is a playmaking guy, and I applaud Todd Bowles for wanting to move him back to safety and kind of get him out of the nickel. And maybe that's going to allow him to kind of just see the ball a little bit better, maybe play some center field and not be so locked in on the slot receiver. Maybe he can get some of those interceptions that are intended for other players.
I hope that's the case. And I do want to give a shout out to Antoine Winfield Jr., because I specifically remember, like, after training camps, you'll see some of the guys over at the jugs machine catching the ball when practice is done. And a lot of times it's like guys that are on the bubble of really making the team. But Antoine Winfield Jr. was a guy that was out there all the time. Didn't really matter when it was. He was trying to get better at holding on to the football. And I don't necessarily, like, I'm not saying Jamel Dean and Carlton Davis aren't putting in that time. Like, they're not doing enough reps to make catches and get more interceptions. But I don't really know exactly what they're supposed to do, to a point of, like, okay, if you do 1,000 reps a day or a week or whatever on the jugs machine, like, is it sometimes just the opportunity isn't always there? I feel like with Carlton, it was a lot.
Yeah.
Carlton had a lot of chances to get the interception.
And always drops interceptions, and it's unfortunate. But
I want to address this comment from Tony as well. Says the secondary seems lost even when it's an obvious pass play. That goes back to 2021. I mean, I hate to bring up the playoff game against the Rams, but it is. They did get beat a lot last year too. But for a team that's been together, I think Jason Light at the combine, when we spoke to him, had a really cool thing to say when he was like, when we won the Super Bowl, 9 of the 11 starters on defense were on rookie contracts. So there's no more excuses with, like, blown coverages and stuff like that. I understand it'll happen from time to time, especially in a Todd Bowles type of defense, but these guys have played together for so long now. It can't continue to happen this season.
I'll push back on that from Tony, because the Bucs had one of the lowest explosive play passing explosive play rates allowed in the NFL. Okay, which is typically what happens when your secondary really isn't doing great. Now, a lot of fans really don't like the fact that the Bucs tend to allow a high completion percentage from quarterbacks, but a lot of that is underneath stuff that is not the responsibility of the secondary. It's the responsibility of dropping edge rushers. It's the responsibility of the linebackers underneath, and the scheme is designed to allow the catch and no yards after catch.
Right.
If you remember going back
supposed
to
to prevent
right.
the explosive plays without
exactly. And so the scheme has worked in that regard this past year because the team got better, with the exception of a couple of guys, at stopping the yards after catch. Right. They were much better at tackling once a receiver caught the ball. So the scheme was working. You may have issues with the scheme as a fan because you don't like seeing those high completion percentages, but that's
no. I'll tell you what fans have a problem with, Josh. It's this right here. It's communication issues. For an offense, it's execution. We got to execute better, right? Nobody wanted to hear Tom Brady or Byron Leftwich say we got to execute better, right? And it was a communication issue. Nobody wants to hear Bowles say, we had a miscommunication.
We got to cover down the field. We understand that.
Yeah, that was a day one install. We get a communication issue. They don't want to hear that, but by God, it's the truth. Okay, I'm just telling you. And you're right, Josh. To your point, it didn't happen very often. The ones where it did happen are the huge glaring ones, right? Like what Matt was talking about earlier. Those 3rd and 16 plays against the Steelers. I think that was the game I'm talking about, right? You were talking about that too, Matt. That game where
that was definitely one of them for sure.
Yeah, right. But those are the memorable plays. The
DJ Moore.
Yeah, the DJ Moore
against the Bucs.
The wide open touchdown pass in the Cowboys playoff game where Carlton Davis didn't get the switch, right? And you got a receiver, I think it was CeeDee Lamb, who was wide open in the end zone. That's what fans hate to see. And you know what they hate to see that, guys? If I'm being frank here, and my name is Scott, but I'm going to say Frank. They hate that because there's no wide open receivers for the Buccaneers. That's why they hate it. They hate to see it. The few times it happens against Tampa Bay's defense per year where there's a coverage bust, because by and large, pretty smart players on defense. I think the scheme's pretty sound, but by God, there's no open wide receivers for the Bucs offense. That's why they're pissed, because they don't get those same opportunities to see Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Well, actually, there was one wide open. Mike Evans went.
Oh, gosh.
And he dropped it. So
he did. But now, I think
I'll rest my case.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about that. And I'll call you Frank or I'll call you Scott. Just don't call me Shirley. But Christopher Cole, I think he has a really great point there in terms of how the Bucs could potentially augment their scheme a little bit, and we saw that in the Cincinnati Bengals game, right? That press man
on the show tonight.
Yeah. So Carlton Davis locked up Jamar Chase in an extremely elite way, because for that game, Bowles just let him off the leash and said, just put your fist in his chest and don't let him go anywhere, and he did that. Now, for those people who are advocating for more press man, myself included, you have to be willing to allow for the downside of that, because you're not always going to win that press man. You're not always going to win that jam. And that's when you will see those explosive plays allowed, because if a receiver beats that press, especially if it's in cover one, now they're off to the races. So there's that balancing act. The Bucs play a ton of cover 3 and cover 4. They maintain the top, so you don't allow those big explosive plays. But the downside of that is they do allow a lot of underneath completions. I would love to see more press man, but with that, you would allow more big downfield completions.
Yeah. Well, listen, I don't have a great segue. So what I'm going to do is, sorry, Mark Cook, rest in peace, my good friend. I tried to think of one as the time was winding down before there was a little break in the conversation, Josh, and I just couldn't do it. So I'm just going to play on the age rejuvenation one. About that.
As we age, our hormones decrease, both for men and women.
I was tired all the time, had no sex drive.
I was groggy.
I felt like I was 80 years old because everything hurt.
I came to age rejuvenation because I was tired all the time.
Bioidentical hormones has really made such an impact in people's lives.
I actually enjoy shopping now.
Got all my energy back.
Mind is sharp.
I feel like I'm 18 again.
It was perfect for me.
Get with age rejuvenation. Do it now. Don't wait.
Call Age Rejuvenation today.
I'm slipping a little bit, folks. Slipping. But I could be slipping a hell of a lot more if I didn't go to age rejuvenation, because I turn 51 next year. That sounds really, really old, but I don't really feel really, really old because I go to age rejuvenation. And you can check out their website, agerejuvenation.com. Folks, go there and sign up for a free, no risk, no obligation complimentary consultation. and get your testosterone checked. Insurance will pay for that. And you might have low testosterone. It's okay. That's normal. That happens in absolutely most men once they hit their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And they're even seeing even more men in today's age in their 30s with lower testosterone than normal because of diet, lack of exercise, things like that. So they have got 5 Tampa Bay area locations to serve you. Right now, they're offering $500 off your testosterone therapy, your first treatment. If you mention Pewter Report, it's a fantastic deal. AgeRejuvenation.com. Sorry, I blew that transition. That was just
that was fine. Listen, you can't be
rookie stuff right there.
You can't nail it.
Matt, we had a chance to have the best podcast that we've ever had, and I blew it. Just like Kansas State blew that game against Florida.
Oh man, I felt bad. Well,
I had to bring it up.
I was happy that they got that far, but
hey, listen.
Did Kansas State blow the game?
The refs blew the game.
There you go. I believe through our text you established it was somebody else.
I was rage texting. I was really pissed because their 7-footer. Would he finish with 2 fouls? How many over the backs are you going to give that guy? Yeah. And our All-American fouled out with 5 fouls, only playing 18 minutes. Sorry, Keontae Johnson. No, listen. I can't. I got to be a man about it. Florida Atlantic, hell of a game. They won the game. They did their part. It wasn't like K-State deserved to win and Florida Atlantic, stole it. No, Florida Atlantic, well, they did steal it because they won. They scored more points and they're a hell of a team. So
South Florida is like the basketball capital of the world. And not
listen,
US.
Florida Atlantic, they've only lost 3 games the whole year.
South Florida with Boca and
I know
FAU and Miami.
Exactly.
All of a sudden,
Florida Atlantic's only lost 3 games.
I see what you did there with that legitimate
Nacho
South Florida. I see.
Well, I mean, USF is not in Southern Florida. Like it's
That's
in Tampa.
true.
Tampa's on the west coast of Florida, and it's not that south.
If we're fair, the University of South Florida is really in Central Florida, but that name's already taken. UCF has that. So
yeah,
we're picking on Josh, who's a Bull, alum. But no, listen. I have to say, great run by K-State and make it to the Elite Eight. We were picked last folks in the Big 12 to finish inside the top 10 in basketball was awesome. What's the old saying? Don't cry because it's over. Smile because you got there, and it happened. So there we go.
Yeah, definitely should be proud of what Kansas State did this season in football and basketball.
It's been quite a year.
Did want to put this comment on. Felix Schmidt said, "Put White on the edge." No, absolutely not. I know he's got the speed, but I don't think he's big enough. And if he's getting stoned by running backs, he is not going to fare well against tight ends and offensive tackles.
Yeah, well said. Yep. Well said, Matt. There we go. Listen, we've had a fantastic show here, and I'm going to try to not blow this transition. So what I'm going to say is you know what, guys? Let's retire and go to Colorado. How about that?
At A-Muni Financial, we help you live in the now.
Dude, congratulations. We're so happy for you.
Thank you.
And even though the now may feel very different, you still need to plan for the future.
How's retirement treating you?
Oh, just fantastic.
I know I say it all the time, but you really got to come up to Colorado.
Let's do it.
All right.
Yeah. We can help you develop that plan to keep you on track so you can still prepare for tomorrow, today. A-Muni Financial. Plan ahead, stay ahead.
That's right. The Bucs are planning to have a really, really good draft. They're going to need it, folks. Todd Bowles needs it for his job. Jason Light needs it because they need a lot of good players. And you need the right people in your financial corner. And, folks, I'm going to recommend Imuni Financial. Why? Because Imuni Financial has been doing this for over 40 years. They got plenty of experience in a wide range of financial services, from advisory services, brokerage services, legacy and retirement planning, investment banking. Hey, how about setting up a college savings accounts for the kiddos? They can help you with that too. Not just in the Tampa Bay area, folks, not just in the state of Florida, but across the country. Imuni Financial can help you plan ahead and stay ahead. Visit Imuni.com and give them a call at 1-800-868-6864.
And when you're done calling Imuni Financial, make sure you like and subscribe to our social media. On Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, we are at Pewter Report. And then on our YouTube channel, which we're on right now at the moment, it is at Pewter Report TV. If you like the podcast, if you like the various clips we put up, have a lot of great things coming up during draft season, our live draft show at the end of April. Please just like and subscribe. Takes you a half a second. It's absolutely free. helps us get those numbies up, and helps more people know about pewterreport.com. But that's going to do it for us on today's show. For Josh Capo, for Scott Reynolds, I'm Matt Matera saying thanks everybody for watching, and we will see you tomorrow for another edition of the Pewter Report podcast.
Oh,
peace out.